In today's episode, we're diving into the most dumb animal attacks ever recorded. From the man who trusted his pet python not to bite, to a YouTuber recklessly bear-hugging a literal bear. It was June 14, 2018. Limpopo National Park is not only home to a wide array of wildlife, but also sprawling savannas, towering baobab trees, and crystal-clear watering holes. The park also boasts over 240 miles of game drive routes that usually burst with activity as animals gather at dawn and dusk, creating a stunning display of natural beauty. It's a place of unparalleled majesty that every wildlife enthusiast dreams of setting foot in. Marco Borghese was a man shaped by both precision and passion, a careful planner who could still be overtaken by the lure of a fleeting moment. As an architect, he was methodical and disciplined, but when it came to photography, his judgment often gave way to impulse. The pursuit of beauty, of capturing something rare and perfect, sometimes clouded the caution he otherwise lived by. His wife Sylvia, a thoughtful and grounded literature teacher, brought calm balance to Marco's intensity. Their 11-year-old son Luca shared his father's curiosity and his mother's gentleness, eagerly absorbing everything he could about African wildlife before the trip. And thus, it was no surprise that on the 14th of June 2018, Italian nationals Marco and Sylvia Borghese, together with their son Luca, headed to the park expecting a fun-filled family adventure. The trio was excited to be there. They spent the first 2 days exploring and watching elephants at the main watering hole. However, Marco wanted to quench his thirst for seeing the famous African lions. And so, on the third day, guide Themba Ndlovu handed Marco his private safari permit for the exclusive western section of the reserve. The guide reminded him of how wild the lions of Limpopo Park were and warned him against exiting the vehicle or approaching predators on foot. That morning, the trio talked about their plans for the day. They would drive 6 miles to the Acacia Plains where they hoped to spot a pride of lions in their natural habitat. After photographing the wildlife, they would proceed to a luxury tented camp where they would spend their final night before flying back to Florence. The morning came and the family, sticking to their plan, made their way to the Acacia Plains. Along the way, they saw a large placard warning of the untamed wilderness within the African bush. At the junction of 2 roads, Themba pointed out fresh lion tracks and reminded them to remain in the vehicle at all times. Aware of high predator activity, Marco knew the key to getting the perfect shot was patience, but the spur of excitement gave him tunnel vision. A few hours into their drive, Marco was attracted by the sight of a massive male lion. They had arrived at a lone acacia tree, and there they found a magnificent beast, belly distended from a recent kill, blood still fresh around its muzzle. Marco was only 40 feet away from his designated photo opportunity, but his desire for the perfect family portrait was overwhelming to him. He set his camera to timer mode as he watched the sun sink toward the horizon. After setting up the shot, he signaled to Sylvia and Luca to join him. He then changed into photographer mode and took out his camera. Marco then stepped out of the vehicle with his family following behind. Themba warned him, but his words drowned in the tourist excitement. He placed his camera on a nearby rock with his head near the viewfinder. He set the timer and hurried to join his wife and son, but Marco didn't notice as a shadow stirred beneath the tree. The male lion cautiously lifted its head, tasting the air as it observed the intruders. The smell of potential danger drew it to full alertness as the 11-year-old Luca was peacefully posing just 5 feet away. While many see them as majestic and regal, lions' behavior remains strictly primal. The male African lion, which can weigh up to 420 pounds, is capable of reaching speeds of 50 miles per hour in short bursts. Though they often appear lethargic during the day, especially after feeding, lions can switch into attack mode in seconds if they sense a threat or opportunity. With a single fluid bound, the lion cleared the 10 feet separating it from the family. In an instant, it lunged low and thrust its massive head forward. Its jaws opened wide, and with terrifying precision, it clamped down around Luca's neck and upper back. The boy's scream cut through the air, but only briefly as the lion's fangs punctured through the skin, bone, and into the base of his skull. His small frame was yanked violently from his feet, the sheer force of the bite cracking vertebrae and crushing part of his rib cage. The lion dragged Luca backward through the dust and grass, his limbs flailing, his cries turning into wet gasps. Blood pooled rapidly in the dirt. Marco, eyes wild with panic, surged forward in a blind sprint. He hurled himself toward his son, shouting his names, arms outstretched. The lion dropped Luca abruptly and spun, baring its teeth. With a low, guttural growl, it met Marco's charge with a blinding swipe of its paw. Claws like hooked blades slashed clean through Marco's chest, ripping flesh from sternum to stomach. Ribs snapped audibly as the blow sent Marco staggering backward. A geyser of blood sprayed across the tall grass. He collapsed to his knees, clutching his chest, coughing blood, still reaching with trembling fingers toward his son's limp form. Sylvia stood paralyzed, her face pale, mouth open in a silent scream. The scene before her barely registered before instinct finally took hold. She turned to run, but only managed a few desperate steps. The lion, now whipped into a full frenzy by the scent of blood and movement, roared and charged again. It closed the distance in seconds. As Sylvia ran, her foot caught on a stone hidden beneath the grass, and she stumbled. Before she could regain her balance, the lion launched forward. Its body collided with hers mid-stride, driving her to the ground like a battering ram. The sounds of bones snapping beneath its weight echoed grotesquely. Her left arm jerked outward in a reflexive, hopeless attempt to push away the crushing force. But it was only a second before her body went still beneath the beast's weight. While all of this happened instantaneously, Themba was frantically radioing for backup from the vehicle. He had known them to be reasonable people, and so as the seconds passed by, he grew desperate. Soon seconds turned to minutes and his feelings grew to horror. He hurriedly called park headquarters, where he informed the ranger on duty about the attack. The ranger immediately issued an emergency response alert in the park. At 4:15 p.m., the alert of a lion attack finally got to the armed response team, who instantly embarked on a rescue mission. When they arrived at the scene, they found the lion still guarding its victims. It was here that the beast had stopped its attack and was now watching over the bodies. Due to the fading light, the rangers had a rough time approaching safely, but after securing the area, they finally reached the victims, but it was too late. Marco's chest had been torn open to the ribs, his skull crushed beyond recognition, and his arms and abdomen mauled to the muscle. Sylvia was found nearby with her back ripped open and spine shattered. Luca had fatal neck and facial injuries, likely from a crushing bite. That evening, the Borghese family's remains were transported to the nearest medical facility. On June 20th, 2018, their extended family arrived from Italy to repatriate the bodies. What was supposed to be a fun family vacation had turned out to be the most grotesque lion attack in the history of Limpopo National Park. To this day, the ferocious male lion that ended the family's lives has not been euthanized and is still roaming around the Acacia Plains in Limpopo. What made this tragedy particularly disturbing is the recovery of the camera. The final image captured shows the family smiling, unaware, while behind them the lion's eyes are already fixed, pupils dilated, muscles tensed. The camera's timer had given them just enough time to pose, but not enough time to live. This family foolishly stepped out of a vehicle just feet away from a lion, while another guy in Florida lay naked on the floor pretending a massive python wouldn't see him as dinner. It was November 8, 2020. Local resident Tommy Raskin prepared for what he called the big one, a live stream featuring his 18-foot reticulated python, Cleo, in Kissimmee, Florida, a home to a thriving exotic pet community despite strict regulations. Tommy, age 32, grew up in Central Florida, where he developed an early fascination with reptiles, spending countless hours at local nature centers and reptile expos. After high school, he worked various low-wage jobs but never pursued higher education or formal training in herpetology. His modest YouTube channel, focused almost exclusively on his reticulated python Cleo, reflected years of self-taught knowledge, though experts often criticized his handling techniques as risky and unprofessional. He was no celebrity. With fewer than 800 YouTube subscribers, he posted videos of Cleo slithering across his arms or feeding on thawed rabbits. By day, he drove for Uber and stocked shelves at a pet store. He lived alone, his social circle limited to online forums and reptile expos. His modest house was quiet except for his collection: several lizards, a small caiman, and Cleo, whom he considered special. He had acquired Cleo 4 years earlier when she was barely 2 feet long. He raised her methodically, with feeding schedules charted on a whiteboard and humidity levels recorded in spreadsheets. As she grew, his content began to revolve solely around her. Friends stopped calling. His sister blocked him after he missed her wedding to medicate Cleo. But Tommy didn't care. He believed he was proving that reptiles weren't just dumb killers. That fateful evening, Tommy prepared his camera for a live stream that would change everything. His plan was absurdly simple: lie shirtless on the floor, cover himself in rabbit scent, and record Cleo's reaction. He titled it, "What Happens If I Pretend to Be Prey?" Several subscribers urged him not to do it. One warned that pythons don't think the way humans hope, but Tommy, ever confident, insisted Cleo had never bitten him. After months of planning for this viral moment, Tommy couldn't contain his excitement. He took a thawed rabbit and rubbed its scent across his bare chest and arms as viewers began joining the stream. He positioned himself on the floor of the enclosure, smiling at the camera. As comments poured in, he drifted further into his fantasy, ignoring the danger lurking in the corner. Reticulated pythons are ambush predators, especially when presented with prey-scented, warm bodies. Pythons don't attack out of malice. They attack because millions of years of evolution had programmed them to associate those specific stimuli with food. A snake doesn't recognize your history together, your voice, or your intentions. It only recognizes feeding cues and threat cues. And a warm body covered in prey scent will always register as a feeding opportunity. Cleo approached slowly, tasting the air with her tongue. The smell drew her closer to Tommy, who lay peacefully on the floor. She raised her head, muscles tensed and ready. With lightning speed, she struck, wrapping her massive coils around his torso. He gasped in pain, trying to free himself as the snake constricted tighter with each exhaled breath. Viewers frantically typed warnings in the chat. They pleaded for someone to call 911, desperately trying to identify his location. By the time authorities forced their way into Tommy's home nearly an hour later, they found Cleo midway through consuming him. Her jaws stretched impossibly wide around his upper torso, slick with saliva. His legs were motionless, already halfway engulfed, and the pressure of her muscular coils had long since stopped his heart. Circulation to his brain had been cut off within minutes, and his internal organs were compressed beyond recovery. What was supposed to be a breakthrough viral video had turned into the most grotesque python attack in Florida's exotic pet history. The massive reticulated python that ended the 32-year-old's life remains housed at a secure facility, a living reminder of what happens when humans forget the untamed nature of apex predators. In the weeks that followed, Tommy's channel didn't go viral, it curdled. Viewers who once cheered his confidence now picked apart every interaction with Cleo, replaying moments where the warning signs flickered like static behind a smile. One clip showed her coiled loosely around his shoulders as he read fan comments aloud. Another caught her tightening on his wrist for a breath too long. He always laughed and would say that she was just feeling cuddly. Animal control removed her that same evening. She was deemed non-releasable and transferred to a private reptile facility where she remains in solitary containment. No name on her enclosure, just a cage, a heat lamp, and silence. From the crushing grip of a massive python in Florida, we now move to the shadowed forest of Northern California, where another thrill-seeker's fatal gamble with a bear hug ends in the same brutal silence. It was September 3, 2023, when Tobias Quill headed to Northern California's Mount Shasta region, expecting a thrilling birthday adventure. The 27-year-old YouTuber known online as Toby Gone Wild, a now deleted channel, had built his modest following on increasingly dangerous stunts he called birthday dares. Each year he pushed the boundaries further: cliff jumps, fire-breathing, mock bull runs, all broadcast to his growing audience. Tobias never had a steady job. Living out of a converted van with his camera equipment, he thrived on spectacle and reactions. His channel featured stunts that teetered between foolhardy and suicidal: hand-feeding coyotes, wrestling near rattlesnake nests, biking blindfolded down gravel trails. Friends had tried to intervene, especially after a rooftop parkour incident in San Diego that nearly shattered both ankles. But Tobias didn't care. Pain passed. Views lasted. That year, however, his subscriber count had stagnated. The algorithm had cooled, so he set his sights on something primal, something that would break the internet. His plan was simple: spot a wild bear, approach calmly, and give it a birthday hug. Just a quick, symbolic one for the camera. No cages, no zoo glass, just him, a bear, and what he called bravery. That crisp September morning, Tobias had read reports on a hiking forum about recent bear activity near a campground trailhead. Locals had complained about trash bins being overturned and growls at night, and that only excited him. He packed his camera gear and a stick of beef jerky as bait, then headed out before sunrise. It didn't take long to find what he was looking for. A black bear, easily over 300 pounds, had torn the lid off a metal dumpster behind a row of cabins and was snout deep in discarded food wrappers. Tobias kept his distance at first, zooming in with a long lens. But then, emboldened, he began his ritual, setting up the tripod, speaking into the camera with shaky excitement, bragging about how this would be the craziest birthday ever. The bear, focused on its meal, ignored him. He paced in front of the lens, working himself up, repeating phrases like "trust in nature" and "it's all energy." He tossed the jerky in the bear's direction, not to feed it, he claimed, but to establish trust. The bear sniffed, looked up, and licked its chops. Tobias mistook that for curiosity. What he failed to grasp, what most humans fail to understand, is that wild bears, especially American black bears, aren't slow or docile like in cartoons. Though smaller than their grizzly cousins, black bears are still powerful predators with strong territorial instincts. They can sprint up to 35 miles per hour, climb trees, swim across lakes, and rip through flesh with one swing of their claws. The bear, now done with the dumpster, caught Tobias in its peripheral vision. It rose halfway onto its hind legs, ears angled forward, sensing motion and noise. Still, Tobias approached, arms spread in some twisted image of affection. He was 5 feet away when the bear lowered itself, grunted, and charged. The camera captured it all. The sound of Tobias gasping, the slap of paws on earth, the scream cut short as the bear lunged. It bowled him over in a second. The camera shook wildly on its tripod, capturing blurred leaves, flashes of movement, and chilling growls. The attack didn't last long, less than a minute, but the bear dragged him by the arm into the nearby brush, out of frame. When Tobias failed to check in with friends later that evening, they used GPS data from his van to track his location. Rangers found the abandoned campsite and the camera still recording on a drained battery. His shredded backpack lay beside the dumpster. Blood was spattered across the pine needles. His body wasn't recovered until the following morning, partially buried beneath a pile of leaves. The bear, startled by approaching searchers, fled the area. Wildlife officials later confirmed the bear had been food conditioned and had likely viewed Tobias as both threat and prey once he approached its feeding zone. The footage made its way to law enforcement. Though quickly removed from most platforms, clips circulated like wildfire. Some viewers were horrified, others celebrated Tobias as a martyr to wild living. But most were just appalled by the sheer stupidity of it all. People weighed in online, repeating the same exhausted facts. Never approach a wild bear, never feed one, never assume safety just because an animal looks calm. It wasn't hate or aggression that killed Tobias Quill, it was an animal responding exactly how nature designed it to. His YouTube channel remained online for a few weeks before being memorialized. But Tobias' story is far from unique. In a world hungry for clicks and fame, reckless thrill seekers keep gambling with wild nature and losing. No lesson learned, no tragedy changing the game, just another name lost to the brutal truth. Nature doesn't bend for human foolishness, and the algorithm's hunger never dies. Tobias greeted a bear with an embrace. A few states away, a girl greets a 2,000-pound bison with an apple. We're seeing a theme here. It was May 28, 2024. Hayden Valley shimmered under the sun, the kind of heat that made tree bark sweat and the grass hum with insects. Alyssa Mercer adjusted her phone lens. She murmured into her chest-mounted camera that nature speaks to those who listen. And today she planned to show communion with one of Earth's most misunderstood giants. To her 87,000 subscribers, it was just another wild mindfulness vlog. Quiet reflections on harmony with nature, always barefoot, always earnest. But this one would be her last. Alyssa was a 28-year-old Texan. Having been attached to the hippie movement through pop culture, she had built her following around her belief in spiritual kinship with wild animals. Her blog featured poetic essays, barefoot hiking trips, and videos of her gently extending hands to deer, squirrel, even raccoons. She preached gentleness and trust. A trust she believed was reciprocal between human and animal when approached with stillness and love. But she was blind to her own recklessness. Her footage showed her sitting cross-legged within feet of a moose. She once posted a reel titled "Eye Contact with the Untamed," featuring a slow, breathy stare into a black bear's curious eyes, filmed from behind a thin veil of bushes. Park rangers had warned her twice before. Citations were issued. She paid them quietly and continued her work. On that May morning, Alyssa stood among the sun-bleached sage of Yellowstone, an apple in her hand and her camera strapped to her chest. The signs were everywhere. Do not approach wildlife, stay at least 25 yards from bison. But she viewed those as rules for tourists, not initiates like herself. Her target was a lone bull grazing near a sulfur creek, about 30 yards from where her Subaru sat baking in the sun. A small crowd had formed, watching nervously as Alyssa stepped barefoot into the field, murmuring about patience and indigenous symbolism. The American bison is far from a creature built for intimacy. It's a massive tank of muscles and horn. Adult males can weigh up to 2,000 pounds and stand over 6 feet tall at the shoulder, capable of running at speeds of up to 35 miles per hour. They don't snarl or growl, nor do they give barked warnings. Instead, when that blocky head lowers even slightly, it's a silent, deadly signal that the clock is ticking. As Alyssa closed the distance, her voice softened with reverence, urging viewers to sense the bison's energy and understand that she meant no harm. She held out the apple like an offering, her fingers trembling slightly. The bison looked up, chewing lazily, eyes dark and unreadable. For one long moment, the scene held still. Sunlight, silence, her outstretched arm bridging two worlds. But then, in a blink, the silence shattered. The bison lowered its massive head, muscles rippling beneath its thick hide, before lunging forward like an unstoppable freight train. The chest-mounted camera jerked violently, the lens spinning and catching glimpses of frantic movement. Dust kicking up, crushed twigs snapping beneath thunderous hooves, and Alyssa's desperate struggle to regain footing. Her sharp intake of breath pierced the chaos. A fleeting sound swallowed instantly by the roar of impact as the bison's powerful horns slammed into her side. The camera tumbled to the ground, capturing a blurred, chaotic whirl of grass and earth as she was thrown violently off balance, the crushing weight and force leaving no room for escape. Witnesses described it later with stunned dismay. The animal struck her square in the chest, flinging her 5 feet into the air before her body hit the earth in a crumpled heap. The bison didn't trample her, didn't need to. One hit was enough. It paused briefly, snorted, then returned to grazing as if nothing had happened. Tourists screamed. A man with a wide-brimmed hat yelled for someone to call 911. A ranger arrived minutes later, found Alyssa unconscious, pulse erratic. She died before the helicopter landed. The autopsy revealed massive internal trauma, ruptured organs, shattered ribs that punctured her lungs, and a severed aorta. Death had come within minutes of impact. Her phone, recovered by park investigators, held dozens of drafts and unpublished footage. Some showed her practicing the approach, whispering mantras. Others featured close-ups of wild animals blinking slowly. One video, dated the day before her death, included a moment where she looked directly into the lens and described bison as peaceful giants of Gaia's heart. The public response was swift and divided. Nature lovers mourned her as a misunderstood soul. Critics called her naive, even delusional. Others accused her of poisoning public perception of wildlife safety with fantasy-laden nonsense. But perhaps the most haunting detail came from a final clip, only 38 seconds long. It showed her standing at the edge of the grass, bison in the distance, apple in hand. The wind muffled her voice, but one sentence emerged clear: "If you trust them, they'll trust you." But at least Alyssa died in an instant. In Florida, a reckless couple risked it all in forbidden waters where multiple predators striked without warning. It was July 19, 2022. The sky over Coral Key, Florida was brushed in cotton pink dust. The sea calm, the beach empty, and the warnings, bold red and repeated, ignored. Jared McIntyre adjusted his chest strap on his GoPro with meticulous confidence. He wasn't reckless, he told himself. He was calculated. After all, he had planned this for weeks. His girlfriend, Melissa Drake, trailed behind him with the easy laughter of someone used to treating boundaries like mere suggestions. They weren't kids, they were 27 and 25 respectively, but something about the forbidden always thrilled them. Jared McIntyre and Melissa Drake were the kind of people either admired or quietly winced at. Restless, beautiful, and just smart enough to be dangerous. Jared was the brains of their stunts, always strategizing for the next viral moment, but his confidence often edged into delusion. Melissa, light-footed and wild-spirited, followed wherever the adrenaline led. They weren't stupid, not exactly, but they had a habit of treating close calls like plot points, not warnings. A busted drone battery mid-cliff dive, a near arrest after trespassing in a drained water park. Their luck had always held. They believed it always would. Jared had been chasing the next big moment for his growing YouTube channel. The subscriber count was stuck under 12,000 and engagement was waning. He wanted the shot, the uncut, jaw-dropping shot that would blow up online. Glimmering blue waters, golden hour lighting, and the illusion of untamed adventure. Melissa had been in his corner from the start. A yoga instructor and self-described vibe chaser, she believed in Jared's dream and fed off the adrenaline of his escapades. Earlier that afternoon, the pair had wandered past the chain-link barrier that cordoned off the eastern stretch of the beach. Posted in thick lettering were signs from both the Coast Guard and Wildlife Commission. No entry, shark feeding zone, 4 p.m. to sunset. These weren't idle suggestions. This section of the shoreline had been designated off-limits during feeding hours for over a decade. The tides in this pocket drew fish migrations, and with them large predatory sharks. Bull sharks, black tips, even the occasional tiger shark. Budget cuts and staff shortages after Hurricane Wesley had left this section unpatrolled for the season. A detail buried in a quietly updated public safety memo no tourist ever read. But Jared saw the signs as props for his narrative. Danger sold. Melissa danced barefoot in the sand behind him, tossing her sundress to the side to reveal her swimsuit like they were just two lovers chasing a sunset. They weren't breaking into a war zone. They thought they were dipping into nature's raw beauty. They waded in slowly. Jared angled the GoPro downward, narrating with a practiced voice, already envisioning how the footage would splice together. Melissa twirled in the shallows, letting her fingers skim the surface. The water around them remained deceptively calm, the surface calm as glass. No lifeguards, no patrol boats, just a mile of restricted ocean, empty except for two people who believed rules didn't apply to them. Beneath that glassy stillness, however, something else moved, unseen but not far. Bull sharks, which are notoriously aggressive and highly territorial, tend to frequent shallow coastal waters. They're unique in their ability to tolerate fresh water, allowing them to hunt in estuaries and river mouths, but in this case, they were drawn by fish blood and bait dumped by marine biologists conducting controlled feedings offshore. But sharks don't circle ominously like in movies, they attack fast, often without warning. It happened fast. Melissa was closest to the drop-off, laughing as she dipped beneath the surface, unaware that a dorsal fin had just sliced the water 20 feet away. Jared's attention was on the horizon, panning his camera across the skyline, oblivious to the silent mass that was already closing in. Then came the sound, a ragged, gurgling scream that didn't sound like any word, just panic clawing its way out of a throat filled with salt water. The bull shark was massive, over 8 feet, and it surged forward with brutal efficiency. Melissa was yanked downward only to reappear in pieces. Her legs kicked weakly as the shark clamped down again, this time dragging her farther toward deeper water. Jared tried to grab her wrist but only got her hair, which slipped through his fingers slick with blood. Jared fought to keep her afloat, pulling her toward the shore, but she was limp and screaming. He tried kicking at the water as if it would deter the predator now fixated on her. But a second shark appeared, then a third. One darted beneath them, grazing his thigh with rough skin like sandpaper. Another tried to bite his torso, barely grazing him, but ripping his GoPro off. Panic became survival. He let go of her and frantically swam to shore. By the time Jared stumbled onto the sand, he was retching. His legs were shaking, his hands trembling as he stared back at the surf. Melissa was gone, just gone. It had been under 10 minutes since they entered the water. Rescue teams didn't arrive until nearly an hour later, alerted by beachgoers who had spotted Jared screaming and stumbling along the closed-off road. A search was mounted, helicopters dispatched, but Melissa's body was never recovered in full. What little they found, shredded swimwear, strands of hair, bloodied sea foam, washed up the next day several miles downshore. The GoPro was found a week later by local fishermen who caught it with a net, but it was beyond repair. The memory card was also irrecoverable. In the weeks that followed, Jared stopped speaking to reporters. He gave no interviews, issued no statements, and refused to answer the endless questions from Melissa's family. He drifted between motel rooms along the Gulf Coast, aimless and quiet, the sunburn on his shoulders peeling into pale, sickly patches. People recognize him sometimes, whispers in gas stations, sidelong glances at diners, but no one ever approached. He'd entered the water chasing legacy and came out with absence. Not even a body to bury. It was July 4th, 2016, a quiet summer morning on the wooded outskirts of Anchorage. 67-year-old Howard Tiller stepped barefoot onto his back porch to enjoy the peaceful air, occasionally broken only by birdsong through the towering spruce trees. But at the tree line near his weathered shed, two massive grizzly bears, drawn by the sweet scent of unsecured garbage bags, were circling each other with increasing aggression. Howard was a retired machinist with a stubborn streak and a dangerous sense of familiarity with wildlife. Living alone on 5 unfenced acres, he treated animals like neighbors, feeding strays and chasing off moose with a broom. He scoffed at bear warnings and refused protective gear, convinced that loud voices and calm gestures worked better than spray or firearms. This stupidity, honed for decades, would be his undoing. Over time, neighbors grew used to watching Howard chase off animals with nothing but loud shouts or household objects. His success turned into a local myth, and from a distance, some even watched the sport. Many believed he had a special understanding of wildlife, and eventually, so did he. That fatal morning, as the two grizzlies growled over the trash pile behind his shed, garbage bags he'd left out overnight despite repeated warnings from wildlife officials, Howard responded as he always had. A neighbor spied him grabbing a metal trash can lid and walked down his gravel path like it was any other Tuesday. What Howard fatally underestimated was the sheer destructive power of the predators treating his backyard like their personal territory. Grizzly bears are among North America's most formidable predators, with adult males weighing up to 800 pounds and possessing the strength to flip over boulders weighing several hundred pounds. Their massive paws, equipped with claws of up to 4 inches long, can decapitate a moose with a single swipe. When defending food sources or feeling threatened, grizzlies become killing machines driven by millions of years of evolutionary programming. His approach was unchanging. Create noise, show dominance, and interrupt what he assumed was just a territorial struggle. Another neighbor across his property later described hearing Howard shouting in a firm and familiar voice, barking out orders as if he were trying to shoo away stray dogs. Howard advanced to within 15 feet of the feeding bear, slamming the lid like a cymbal and swinging it over his head in what he believed would come across as threatening. The younger bear reacted with alarm, crashing into the brush in a panicked retreat. But the larger male stayed firmly in place, intent on finishing its meal. This particular bear had been interrupted mid-feeding and showed visible signs of past battles that had likely left it on edge and hyper-defensive. Bears that become conditioned to human food often stop fearing people entirely and instead come to see them as rivals. As Howard continued his approach, undeterred by the bear's warning posture, the animal made a sudden lethal decision. People watching said the grizzly charged without hesitation, closing the distance in less than 3 seconds. Howard managed to lift the trash can lid in a weak attempt to shield himself, but the bear smashed through it effortlessly. The lid clattered onto the gravel, useless, as the full force of the bear's bulk threw Howard backward and pinned him instantly. The autopsy later cited that the bear's jaws crushed Howard's thigh, its canines snapping his femur and tearing deep into muscle. His shouts turned to screams as claws ripped open his chest and stomach. Weighing nearly 10 times more, the grizzly pinned him effortlessly and kept attacking. Residents, drawn out by the commotion, watched in stunned silence as the bear dragged Howard's limp, bloodied body into the brush. One neighbor, witnessing it through binoculars, called 911 as it unfolded. Within seconds, both man and animal disappeared into the trees. All that remained was scattered trash, crushed foliage, and streaks of blood. When authorities arrived 40 minutes later with tranquilizers and tracking gear, the bear was gone. They found Howard's body in a shaded clearing just 40 yards from his porch, torn open with the unmistakable violence of a grizzly kill. A trail of blood through crushed ferns and matted grass marked the brutal path he'd been dragged. Investigators found used bear spray in a whistle just feet away inside his porch, dismissed as unnecessary. The incident spurred renewed efforts to educate Alaskans on food waste and the dangers of wildlife habituation. A small memorial service was held 4 days later at the Anchorage Cremation Center, attended by a few close neighbors and his brother, who flew in from Montana to scatter Howard's ashes near the porch he had once considered safe. Howard tried to referee a bear fight with a trash can lid. Meanwhile, a teen in Washington walked straight toward a wild cougar, staring it down like it was some kind of game. It was August 7, 2015. While the pine-scented air hung still over Washington's Wenatchee National Forest, a group of high schoolers moved single file along a narrow ridge trail, their voices echoing softly through the towering evergreens. Most were participating in a weekend leadership retreat, but 17-year-old Owen Carver had his own agenda brewing beneath his confident exterior. Owen was the kind of teenager who commanded attention without asking for it. With his brown hair and cocky grin, he had cultivated an image as the group's resident survivalist. His social media account featured dozens of videos where he demonstrated danger drills and talks about dominance over wildlife. His followers, mostly classmates and friends, hung on every word as he explained how predators only go after prey that acts afraid. He thought confidence was a substitute for caution, proof his foolishness didn't understand what real danger looked like. That afternoon, while the group rested at a scenic clearing, Owen's restless energy got the better of him. His classmates mentioned he had been chafing under the adult leader's constant reminders to stay close, likely viewing their caution as weakness rather than wisdom. His phone battery was running low, but he said he wanted one more video, unaware that it would be his last one. As they wandered toward a rocky outcrop, movement caught his eye. Beneath a shaded ledge, partially concealed by shadows and scrub brush, a large cat stared back at him with unblinking golden eyes. The cougar was magnificent, easily 6 feet long from nose to tail, its tawny coat blending perfectly with the rocks. Two of Owen's friends, Jake and Madison, had followed him despite the leader's instructions to stay put. They stopped short when they spotted the predator, their faces draining of color. The cougar remained motionless, crouched low with its head slightly tilted, tail twitching. Jake muttered a curse and stepped back. Owen, grinning, told them to stay put. He was about to win a staring contest with a mountain lion. He believed holding eye contact showed dominance and refusing to back down was a sign of control. But anyone who actually understood wild animals would have called it a sign of stupidity. What Owen mistook for calmness in the cougar's posture was in reality the silent tension of a predator sizing up a potential threat. The twitching tail wasn't a casual flick, it was a clear warning, well documented in wildlife behavioral studies and often a precursor to attack. In most cases, cougars avoid human contact, but when they feel cornered or challenged, their response is immediate and brutal. Mountain lions, also known as cougars or pumas, are stealthy apex predators. Weighing up to 220 pounds, they can leap 15 feet vertically and 40 feet horizontally with 2-inch retractable claws and a 400 psi bite. Most critically, cougars are ambush predators, evolved to kill quickly and silently, typically targeting the neck and spine to ensure an instant kill. Owen began moving slowly toward the animal. He kept his gaze locked on the cougar's eyes. His arms relaxed at his sides in what he assumed was a stance of dominant calm. Each step brought him closer to a wild animal that had already made up its mind. When he came within 15 feet of the ledge, the cougar's body tensed like a coiled spring. According to Jake and Madison, the attack happened almost faster than the group could register. The big cat launched forward in a single violent leap. Owen managed to lift up his arms and let out a shout, but the cougar's paw struck him across the face with brutal force, sending him crashing backward onto the rocks. The animal landed squarely on top of him, jaws locking around his neck in a killing hold honed by millennia of evolution. The bite targeted the spine and major arteries, ensuring a swift death while minimizing the cougar's exposure to risk. Jake and Madison screamed, frozen by the sight of their friend being dragged toward the brush. They turned and ran down the trail, shouting for help as their cries echoed through the forest. It took nearly 30 minutes for rangers to reach the site, guided by the teens' panicked directions and screams. When they arrived, the cougar was still nearby, pacing in a tight circle near Owen's body with its ears flattened. Classic territorial behavior indicating it was prepared to defend what it considered its kill. He had already died from the initial attack. The rangers were forced to euthanize the animal on the spot, following standard protocol for a confirmed human fatality. A healthy adult male, the cougar had not been hunting Owen as prey, but had likely been startled by his confrontational approach. Owen's death sent ripples through outdoor education communities and led to renewed scrutiny of wilderness safety practices. Hours before the attack, his final Instagram post showed him smiling at the camera with a caption boasting about showing up the less experienced students and promising dramatic footage from the day's hike. His funeral was held the following week at a small church in Tacoma, where friends, classmates, and stunned trip leaders gathered to remember a teenager known for his energy, confidence, and unshakable belief that he could handle anything nature threw his way. Owen tried to stare down a cougar like it was a challenge, and with increased bravado, a man in Florida stripped off his shirt and yelled at an 11-foot alligator just to prove a point to his ex. It was July 20th, 2022 when the air hung thick and oppressive over central Florida's Lake Hachanilla. The backyard barbecue at the Henderson's lakeside property had been winding down for hours, but the combination of beer, old grudges, and summer heat had transformed what should have been a peaceful gathering into something far more volatile. At the center of the brewing storm stood Zach Renner, his face flushed red from alcohol and humiliation. Zach was a 29-year-old construction worker from Kissimmee, known among his circle for his impulsive decisions and inflated sense of his own capabilities. His social media showed a pattern of escalating stunts, leaping off overpasses, wrestling pit bulls, even grabbing a rattlesnake barehanded. Raised by a hard-working single father who prized toughness and rarely intervened, Zach learned early on that attention, even through dumb recklessness, was its own kind of validation. The evening had started pleasantly enough, with grilled burgers and cold beers flowing freely among the dozen or so friends gathered on the Henderson's dock. But as the sun set and inhibitions lowered, old tensions began to surface. The breaking point came when Zach's girlfriend of 2 years, Jessica, announced in front of everyone that she was done with his childish crap and walked away, leaving him standing alone by the water's edge. The humiliation was too much for Zach's fragile ego to bear. His friends watched as his face cycled through embarrassment, anger, and finally a dangerous kind of determination. Earlier in the evening, someone had mentioned spotting what looked like a large alligator near the boat ramp, but the sighting had been dismissed as probably just a log or debris. Zach shouted, slurring slightly as he pointed toward the dark water, that he was going to find the gator and ride it like a cowboy. He said he'd show everyone what a real man looked like. To him, it was a stunt for laughs and bragging rights. To everyone else, it was another reminder that Zach never understood where confidence ended and stupidity began. His friends initially laughed, assuming it was just drunken bravado, but as Zach began stripping off his shirt and stumbling toward the water's edge, their amusement turned to alarm. Several people called out for him to stop, but Zach was beyond reason, driven by a toxic combination of alcohol, wounded pride, and the need to prove something to people who were no longer paying attention. Thinking before acting had never been his strong suit. What Zach didn't know was that local anglers had recently reported an unusually large male alligator, estimated at 11 feet long, prowling this particular stretch of Lake Hachanilla. Wildlife officials suspected the animal had been pushed into the narrower bay by territorial disputes with other males during mating season. American alligators are ancient predators, with instincts honed over millions of years. Adult males can grow up to 14 feet long and weigh over 1,000 pounds, delivering a bite strong enough to crush a bowling ball. Their 80 razor-sharp teeth form a grip that, once locked, is almost impossible to escape. As Zach moved deeper, the water rose to his chest, the soft, uneven lake bottom slowing his steps. He slapped the surface and shouted taunts, unaware of the danger. His friends watched in uneasy silence, some filming, hoping it was just another stunt. Little did they know, something beneath the surface had already begun to shift. The alligator had been likely watching from the moment Zach entered the water. Concealed among the reeds just 20 feet away, the massive reptile remained perfectly still, only its eyes and nostrils breaking the surface. To the predator, Zach's splashing and shouting weren't intimidating, They were an announcement of prey in distress. The attack came without warning. One moment Zach was chest deep in the murky water, still yelling taunts at the darkness. The next, the surface exploded as nearly half a ton of prehistoric predator surged forward with devastating speed. The alligator's massive jaws clamped around Zach's midsection with bone-crushing force, the impact audible even over his single terrified scream. What followed was a textbook death roll, the alligator's signature killing technique. The massive reptile spun rapidly in the water, using its entire body weight to disorient its prey and cause massive internal trauma. The water around them erupted in a violent whirlpool of foam and red, as Zach's body was twisted and torn by forces no human could survive. Chaos broke out on the dock. Jessica screamed and collapsed as others shouted Zach's name into the silent water. One guy stepped in to help but froze when the alligator surfaced, Zach's limp body in its jaws before vanishing into deeper water. All they could do was call for help. Emergency services arrived within the hour, but everyone knew it was a recovery operation, not a rescue. The lake was immediately closed to the public while wildlife officials began the grim task of locating both the victim and the predator responsible. The alligator was found and euthanized the following day, its stomach contents confirming what everyone already knew. Zach's remains, what could be recovered, were returned to his family for burial. The incident made local news, with a few outlets treating it as another example of Florida man's stupidity. In the days following the attack, Florida Fish and Wildlife officials closed off access to the lake and posted new warning signs around the perimeter. They also launched a community outreach campaign on the dangers of feeding or approaching wild alligators, emphasizing how quickly such behavior can lead to fatal outcomes. After this lakeside dare ended with Zach in a gator's jaws, a backyard zookeeper walked into her enclosure carrying lasagna, convinced affection could outweigh instinct. It was October 25, 2017, when the autumn air carried the scent of pine and wood smoke across Marlene Brickshaw's property just outside Flagstaff, Arizona. The 58-year-old retired librarian stood at her kitchen window watching two massive black bears lumber around the chain-link enclosure she had built with her own hands 3 years earlier. What began as a rescue mission for two orphan cubs had turned into something far more dangerous than Marlene ever expected. Marlene was the kind of woman who collected stray cats, fed wild deer from her back porch, and believed deeply that animals could sense the purity of human intentions. Her neighbors knew her as the eccentric lady who lived in what she called Little Ark, a wooded property cluttered with bird feeders, rescue dog kennels, and now a makeshift bear habitat that had become the talk of the county. Her clothes perpetually bore the stains of whatever animal she was currently nursing back to health. 3 years earlier, wildfires in northern Arizona left two black bear cubs orphaned. Marlene, following the rescue efforts, applied for a wildlife permit and convinced authorities to let her take them in, claiming she had rehab experience in proper facilities. Her so-called proper facilities were a 40 by 60 foot chain-link pen she built behind her house, roofless with no backup barriers or safety protocols. A single gate opened straight into the enclosure, offering no secure way to feed or separate the bears. It wasn't just unsafe, it was flat out stupid. The kind of setup no trained professional would ever go near without sounding the alarm. For 3 years, Marlene hand-fed the bears daily, referring to them affectionately as her boys, Bruno and Baxter. She would enter their enclosure with buckets of food, talking to them in the same gentle voice she had once used to calm nervous library patrons. Local reporters occasionally featured her story as a heartwarming example of human-animal bonding, and Marlene basked in the attention, unaware of her recklessness. What Marlene interpreted as trust was actually learned behavior. The bears associated her presence with food, nothing more. As the cubs grew into 300-pound adults, neighbors began expressing concern about the increasingly inadequate enclosure and Marlene's casual approach to safety. The bears had been spotted standing on their hind legs against the fence, their massive paws easily reaching over the top of the chain link barrier. Black bears can range in color from cinnamon to black, with adult males reaching up to 600 pounds. Their 4-inch claws and 800 psi bite force make them capable of crushing bone and tearing flesh. Though omnivorous and often unpredictable, even hand-raised bears retain wild instincts and can turn violent without warning. Having one in your property leaves no room for stupidity. By fall 2017, one of the bears, Bruno, the larger of the two, had begun showing signs of food aggression, particularly when meals were delayed or when Marlene approached with smaller portions than expected. Bears in captivity often develop resource guarding behaviors, especially when their feeding schedule becomes irregular. That October afternoon, Marlene was running nearly 2 hours late for feeding, delayed by a call from her sister. She loaded a tray with leftover lasagna, rolls, and fruit, then headed toward the pen. Security footage showed her carrying the food in both hands as she approached the enclosure. She wore no protective gear, no gloves, no face shield, nothing to shield her. The enclosure lacked a drop cage or buffer gate for safe feeding. It was just Marlene, a tray of food, and 2 restless 300-pound bears. As she stepped inside, whistling her usual greeting, Bruno was already pacing near the gate. His body language, tense movements, fixated stare on the food, ears flattened, was a clear warning. These were textbook signs of a bear gearing up to dominate a meal. She barely had time to register any of it before Bruno lunged. He struck her in the chest with a force that lifted her off her feet, sending her crashing onto the hard-packed earth. The tray clattered from her hands, lasagna and fruit scattering across the dirt as her screams filled the cage. What followed was brutal and efficient. Bruno's powerful jaws clamped down on Marlene's face and neck, his teeth designed for crushing bone and tearing flesh. As she struggled weakly beneath his massive weight, he began dragging her toward a shaded corner of the enclosure, a behavior that wildlife experts recognize as a bear's instinct to protect and consume its kill away from potential competitors. Her screams carried across the wooded property to her nearest neighbor, Jim Kowalski, who was working in his garage nearly 200 yards away. He immediately called 911, but the remote location meant that emergency responders faced a lengthy drive on winding mountain roads. By the time sheriff's deputies and wildlife officials arrived 2 hours later, Marlene was beyond help. Bruno stood over her partially consumed remains, blood matting his dark fur, while Baxter cowered in the far corner of the enclosure. The scene was so horrific that several first responders required counseling afterward. Bruno was euthanized on site, while Baxter was tranquilized and eventually transferred to a legitimate wildlife sanctuary in Colorado, where he would live out his days behind proper barriers with trained professionals. The investigation revealed numerous safety violations and highlighted the dangers of amateur wildlife rehabilitation. Arizona Game and Fish Department spokesman Mark Hart summed up the tragedy succinctly that love is not a safety protocol. Wild animals, regardless of how they're raised, retain their predatory instincts and unpredictable nature. Marlene was dragged off by a bear she raised like a dog, but at least she misunderstood that trust. Meanwhile, a fisherman in Galveston coated himself in anchovy paste and waded straight into shark-infested water. It was March 17, 2018, and the Gulf Coast waters were calm as Craig Millen stepped ankle-deep into the surf before sunrise. The 52-year-old commercial fisherman from Galveston had been walking these beaches since childhood, his weathered hands and sun-damaged skin telling the story of decades spent battling wind, salt, and tide. But Craig's latest obsession would prove to be his undoing. Craig was known among his fishing circle for his eccentric habits and deep distrust of anything manufactured or store-bought. Craig's garage was packed with driftwood lures, rope-braided lines, and jars of his homemade sunscreen, a mix of cod liver oil, crushed anchovies, and street herbs. He slathered it on daily, ignoring friends' complaints that he smelled like a rotting bait bucket. Even among seasoned anglers, his methods pushed well beyond common sense. Craig's homemade sunscreen wasn't just ineffective, it was essentially a dinner bell for every predator within miles. The cod liver oil and crushed anchovies created a scent trail that would carry on the current like a highway leading directly to him. But Craig dismissed such concerns with the confidence of someone who had never been proven wrong by nature's harsh lessons. He insisted that sharks were drawn to motion, not scent, and often waved off the shark incident reports posted near the Galveston Pier. According to Craig, the idea that blood attracts sharks was just Hollywood nonsense. In his view, staying calm and avoiding splashing was all it took to stay safe. That March morning, Craig skipped his usual waders, saying they were too hot for the warm weather. Wearing only swim trunks and his worn fishing vest, he coated himself in his homemade sunscreen, the oily mix glistening as he waded into the murky water. It was the kind of setup that ignored every basic rule of safe shoreline fishing. His friend Danny, standing on the shore a few yards away, watched with mild amusement. A recent storm had left the Gulf murky with near zero visibility. What Craig didn't see, and what biologists have been tracking, was a group of 4 to 6 foot juvenile bull sharks prowling the shallows, drawn by the disoriented prey stirred up by the rough surf. Bull sharks are among the world's most dangerous, second only to great whites in human attacks. They can reach 11 feet, weigh over 500 pounds, and deliver a bite force of 1,300 psi. Able to thrive in both salt and fresh water, they often hunt in shallow areas where people swim, and their powerful sense of smell lets them detect blood at 1 part per billion. Texas Parks and Wildlife had issued advisories about increased shark activity, but Craig rarely paid attention to official warnings. He preferred to trust his own experience and instincts, which would be his undoing. As Craig waded waist-deep into the chocolate-colored surf, his scent trail spread like an invisible cloud through the water. The combination of fish oils and organic compounds created an olfactory beacon that registered immediately on the sensitive chemoreceptors of every predator in the area. To a bull shark, Craig didn't smell like a human, he smelled like prey in distress, wounded and vulnerable. Within minutes of casting his first line, it happened. Danny saw Craig jerk violently to one side, then scream, a sharp guttural sound that shattered the calm. A 5-foot bull shark had struck from below, ramming Craig's left thigh and clamping down with a suddenness that stunned even Danny, who stood frozen at the waterline. Craig thrashed and tried to retreat, but the shark held fast. Bull sharks don't nibble, they grip, twist, and tear. As it shook its body, flesh and blood fanned out in the waves. Craig screamed again, then fell forward, struggling to stay upright. Danny ran toward the water but stopped short, helpless. The water around Craig had turned red. In under 30 seconds, it was over. The shark let go and vanished. Craig collapsed sideways into the surf, his face twisted in agony, blood pouring from a gaping wound where the femoral artery had been torn open. What Danny had first mistaken for just another misstep in the water had unfolded into something far worse than he was prepared to witness. 2 off-duty lifeguards, brothers who had been jogging along the shoreline, sprinted into the water without hesitation. They dragged Craig's limp form onto the sand, his left leg mangled and bleeding profusely. One brother applied pressure to the wound while the other called 911, but both could see that Craig was fading fast. Emergency crews arrived within 8 minutes, but Craig had already lost too much blood. Paramedics fought to stabilize him en route, but his pulse faded steadily. He was pronounced dead at the hospital, never regaining consciousness. The investigation made clear what had gone wrong. Craig's open tackle box was found in the surf, unused shrimp bait still inside, showing he hadn't been chumming or doing anything that typically attracts sharks. But the fish oil coating his body told a different story. Texas Parks and Wildlife issued a new advisory warning anglers not to use animal-based oils or fish-scented products while wading in coastal waters, especially during low-visibility conditions when sharks rely most on scent. For Craig's fishing circle, the message was painfully clear. At his memorial overlooking the same stretch of shoreline, his friend Danny summed it up. Craig always said instincts beat book smarts. Turns out, facts beat both. It was on May 2, 2018, in the remote countryside of the Nabarangpur district in Odisha, eastern India. The rural landscape stretched endlessly under the setting sun, with dusty roads winding through scattered villages and dense patches of forest. This was tiger country, a region where ancient trees lined the roadways, their canopies homed to countless species, while the undergrowth provided shelter for everything from small mammals to some of India's most formidable predators. The boundaries between human settlements and wild habitats blurred here, creating an environment where dangerous encounters were always a possibility. Prabhu Bhattara was a local taxi driver who had spent years navigating these rural roads. He was known for his friendly demeanor and his fascination with wildlife photography, often sharing photos on social media of the various animals he encountered during his travels. His phone was always within reach, ready to capture whatever unusual sight might present itself. On this particular evening, Prabhu was driving a group of wedding guests home after a long day of celebration. The passengers, dressed in their finest traditional attire, had entrusted him with the long journey back to their village. The day had begun like any other wedding celebration in rural India, with elaborate preparations, traditional ceremonies, and a feast that brought together families from across the region. The guests had spent hours dancing, eating, and celebrating before making arrangements for their journey home through the remote countryside. The sloth bear is one of India's most dangerous predators, despite being smaller than its North American cousins. Standing just 2 to 3 feet at the shoulder, these bears typically weigh between 120 and 310 pounds and are deceptively powerful, with long curved claws that can reach up to 3 inches in length and prominent canine teeth designed for both foraging and defense. Native to the Indian subcontinent, sloth bears are known for their aggressive temperament. As Prabhu's vehicle rounded a bend in the road, he spotted movement in the tree line. A large, dark shape was moving among the trees, limping noticeably and moving erratically. He immediately stopped the vehicle. When the creature moved into the open, it became clear what they were looking at: an injured sloth bear. The passengers immediately began urging Prabhu to drive on, recognizing the danger, but Prabhu was already reaching for his phone and stepping out onto the road. He approached the bear with his phone raised, moving to within just a few yards of the animal. He raised his phone and prepared to take the selfie, but as he positioned himself for the shot, his foot slipped on a patch of mud near the roadside. The sudden movement triggered the bear's attack response. With its escape route limited by its injury, the animal launched itself at Prabhu, its powerful claws extended and jaws open wide. The bear struck Prabhu with significant force, knocking him to the ground. Its claws sliced through his clothing and into his flesh as he fell onto the dusty earth. The bear released his arm and clamped down on his shoulder area, its teeth penetrating deep into muscle tissue. The animal continued its assault, moving to attack his neck and upper chest area. A stray dog appeared and began barking at the bear, even attempting to bite it, but the predator remained focused on its attack. One woman from the wedding party threw a stick at the bear, but the animal continued its assault. The bear's attack focused on Prabhu's neck and throat area, causing severe trauma to vital structures. His movements became increasingly weak as blood loss and injuries took effect. The bear continued its attack for several minutes, until Prabhu's body became motionless. When police and forest officials arrived, the scene was chilling. Prabhu Batara's body bore the marks of the savage assault, deep gashes to his neck, chest, and arms. He had bled out from the horrific injuries. Animal control officers tracked and tranquilized the injured bear, transporting it to a sanctuary for treatment. The incident prompted renewed warnings from local authorities about maintaining safe distances from wild animals. Prabhu's tragic death was a sobering reminder that wild animals are never to be underestimated. But just when you think you've heard it all, our next tale takes us to 2014, where an Asian elephant proved that in the wild, size and power matter. It was September 23, 2014 in Yellowstone National Park, a vast wilderness stretching across Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho, where the wild still decides the rules. Rolling meadows stretch toward distant mountains, painted with late summer gold. Steam hissed from geysers and hot springs, drifting into the crisp afternoon air. Dense pine forests stood like sentinels, their needles whispering in the breeze. Elk bugled in the distance, and the occasional shadow of an eagle swept across the open fields. It was peak tourist season. Cars crawled along scenic drives, families craned their necks from boardwalks, and camera shutters clicked every few seconds. Most visitors were looking for the same thing, a close encounter with Yellowstone's most famous resident, the American bison. Richard Park, a 23-year-old electrician from Billings, Montana, was in the park for work, repairing wiring at a ranger outpost. Friends knew him as adventurous, upbeat, and never without his phone, always eager to capture something worth sharing. That afternoon, while packing up tools, he overheard other visitors talking excitedly about a massive bull bison grazing in a nearby meadow. Bison are deceptively dangerous. Adult males can weigh up to 2,000 pounds, stand 6 feet tall at the shoulder, and can charge at speeds of 35 miles per hour. Despite their bulky frames and calm demeanor, they are unpredictable, especially during rutting season, when hormones make bulls more aggressive. Rangers warn visitors to keep at least 25 yards away. Many ignore the signs. Intrigued, Richard convinced two co-workers to join him for a quick look before heading back. They followed a narrow dirt trail toward the meadow, the air carrying the scent of pine and sage. Sunlight flickered through the leaves, and the quiet was broken only by the crunch of gravel underfoot. Warning signs lined the trail, bold red letters warning visitors to stay at least 25 yards away from bison. Richard barely glanced at them. His phone was already up, the lens focused on the bull. His co-workers stopped at the edge of the posted boundary, their voices urgent as they called for him to back off. The tone in their voices carried more than caution. It was the kind of nervousness that comes from knowing how fast a bad decision can turn deadly. Richard only waved them off, eyes fixed on the massive animal in the meadow. Each step brought him closer, boots pressing into the damp grass. The faint scent of earth and wild sage mixed with the distant hiss of wind through the aspens. The bison lifted its head, its dark, glassy eyes locked on him like twin black mirrors. Nostrils flared wide, steam puffing into the cool air. Then came the sound. A low, guttural snort, deep and vibrating like something pulled from the earth itself. The change was instant. One heartbeat, the bull was still. The next, it lunged. Muscle rippled beneath a shaggy brown coat as it exploded into motion, hooves tearing into the ground with a force that made the earth shudder. The pounding rhythm echoed like war drums through the meadow, each strike closing the distance at terrifying speed. 25 feet was gone in less than 2 seconds. Richard froze, just long enough for instinct to kick in. He turned to run, but he never made it more than a few steps. The bison's massive head smashed into his side with a bone-cracking thud. The sheer force lifted him off the ground, his body twisting violently in midair before slamming down into the grass. Pain lanced through his ribs, followed by a sharp pop as bone gave way. A strangled gasp burst from his lungs, the air ripped out of him. Before he could recover, the bull was already on top of him, curved horns hooked under his rib cage, driving upward with horrifying strength. Richard felt himself lifted again, weightless for a moment, before he was thrown several feet like a rag doll. He hit the earth hard, agony blooming in his chest and back. The world spun. The bull charged again, hooves struck with devastating accuracy, one crushing into his ribcage, another slamming into his abdomen. The impact ruptured organs, the weight nearly a ton pressing down until his chest caved. Blood bubbled at his lips as each stomp compounded the damage, his body buckling under the relentless assault. His co-workers screamed from the trail's edge, helpless against the raw power before them. The bull lowered its head and shoved him across the ground, rolling him onto his side before trampling him again. The sound of heavy hooves meeting flesh and bone was sickening, each impact leaving him weaker, slower. Richard's arms twitched, then still. His breath came shallow, ragged, before stopping altogether. The bull stood over him for a moment, sides heaving, then turned away. Its tail flicked lazily as it walked back toward the aspen grove, resuming its grazing as if nothing had happened. The meadow was silent except for the distant rustle of grass. Rangers arrived within minutes of the call, but there was nothing they could do. Richard Park was pronounced dead at the scene. The bull, identified as B211, had been involved in prior incidents with visitors who ignored safety distances, but as a protected animal, it remained under observation. News of his death spread quietly through his hometown. Friends described him as someone who could turn any ordinary day into an adventure. His family, stunned, struggled to comprehend how a few steps too close could lead to such violence. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones about the attack, sharing memories of his easy smile, his curiosity, and his love for the outdoors. It was the brutal truth of how quickly wildlife can turn deadly. In sunny Florida, that truth would be proven again when a moment of overconfidence by the gator pit erupted into chaos and blood. It was August 14, 2010, in the heavy, humid air of Orlando, Florida. Just a short drive from the theme parks was Gatorland, a 110-acre attraction known as the alligator capital of the world. The park was built around sprawling ponds and marshland, with raised boardwalks and wooden viewing platforms giving visitors a close but safe look at hundreds of American alligators. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the wooden walkways, creating a sweltering atmosphere that made the air shimmer above the dark water. Cypress trees draped with Spanish moss provided patches of shade, while the constant chorus of insects and occasional splash from the water below reminded visitors they were in genuine Florida wilderness. Safety railings lined every viewing area, with multiple warning signs posted in English and Spanish about maintaining distance from the water's edge. Mark Bennett, a 34-year-old tourist from Savannah, Georgia, had arrived at Gatorland that morning with 3 college friends. Bennett worked as a marketing coordinator but had built a modest social media following through increasingly risky content. His Instagram featured him hanging off building ledges, swimming in restricted areas, and posing dangerously close to wildlife during previous trips. Bennett had specifically chosen Gatorland because he wanted footage that would outdo his previous posts. He'd researched the park's Jumperoo show, where alligators leap from the water to snatch whole chickens suspended from above their enclosures. The show took place on a platform extending over a large pond containing 6 adult alligators, each measuring between 8 and 11 feet in length. The morning had started routinely. Bennett and his friends purchased tickets, grabbed breakfast at the park's cafe, and began their tour. Bennett immediately started filming, capturing regular tourist shots while scouting for his planned stunt. He'd noticed during the 11 a.m. Jumperoo show that the feeding platform had a lower section where staff members stood to dangle the chickens. The area was clearly marked as off-limits to visitors, separated by a waist-high chain barrier and multiple warning signs. The American alligator is a heavyweight ambush predator native to the southeastern United States, especially Florida and Louisiana. Adult males can reach 14 feet in length and weigh over 1,000 pounds. Their bite force measures approximately 3,000 pounds per square inch, enough to crush a bowling ball. These apex predators are perfectly adapted for explosive bursts of speed both in water and on land, capable of launching their entire body length out of the water when striking prey. During the afternoon Jumperoo show, Bennett made his fatal decision. While the crowd watched the scheduled demonstration from the safe viewing area, Bennett ducked under the chain barrier and stepped onto the restricted feeding platform. His phone was already recording as he positioned himself at the platform's edge, directly above the water where the largest alligator, an 11-foot male nicknamed Brutus, was floating expectantly. Bennett extended his phone over the water for a close-up shot, leaning forward past the platform's edge. Brutus, conditioned to associate the platform with feeding time, immediately fixated on the movement above. The alligator's tail began the characteristic side-to-side motion that precedes a strike. Without warning, Brutus exploded from the water with devastating force. His massive jaws clamped down on Bennett's extended right arm just below the elbow. The impact was so violent that Bennett's phone flew into the water as he was yanked forward. The alligator's teeth, designed to grip and hold rather than slice, punctured through muscle and bone, creating multiple compound fractures. Brutus immediately began the death roll, a hunting technique where alligators spin rapidly to disorient prey and tear away chunks of flesh. Bennett was pulled completely off the platform and into the murky water. The spinning motion separated his forearm from his body within seconds, sending arterial blood spraying across the platform and into the pond. Bennett surfaced briefly, his severed arm creating a massive blood trail before Brutus struck again. This time, the alligator's jaws closed around Bennett's torso, crushing ribs and puncturing both lungs. The death roll resumed, and Bennett disappeared beneath the surface. The entire attack lasted less than 90 seconds. Park staff immediately evacuated the area and contacted emergency services, but Bennett's body wasn't recovered until the following morning after wildlife officials removed Brutus from the enclosure. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission launched an investigation into the incident, ultimately ruling it an accidental death caused by visitor negligence. Bennett's family mourned in private, accepting with heavy hearts that a single mistake had cost him his life. The incident sparked renewed discussions about social media culture and the lengths people will go to for viral content. But while this encounter played out under the sweltering Florida sun, danger was also lurking hundreds of miles to the north, this time deep in the wooded trails of New Jersey. There, a group of friends out for a casual hike would come face to face with a predator that could run them down, climb after them, and tear them apart in seconds. It was September 21st, 2014 at the Opshawa Preserve in West Milford, New Jersey. The 576-acre nature preserve was a popular hiking destination located approximately 45 miles northwest of New York City. Dense forests of oak, maple, and pine trees covered rolling hills, with well-marked trails winding through the wilderness. The preserve was known for its diverse wildlife population, including deer, foxes, and occasional black bears that wandered through from the surrounding highlands region. Multiple warning signs were posted at trail entrances advising visitors about potential wildlife encounters and proper safety rules. The area had experienced increased bear activity in recent months, with several sightings reported by hikers and local residents. Park officials regularly reminded visitors to maintain safe distances from all wildlife and to never approach or feed wild animals. Stephen Logan was a 24-year-old Rutgers University student studying engineering. He was an avid hiker and outdoor enthusiast who frequently explored New Jersey State's parks and nature preserves with his friends. Stephen was known for his adventurous spirit and his habit of documenting his hiking experiences through photography, often sharing images of scenic views and wildlife encounters on social media. On this particular day, he'd organized a hiking trip with 4 college friends, planning to spend the afternoon exploring the trails at Opshawa Preserve. The group had chosen this location specifically for its reputation as excellent hiking terrain and its proximity to their university campus. The day had begun with the 5 friends meeting at the preserve entrance around noon, equipped with water bottles, snacks, and cameras for what they expected to be a routine hiking adventure. As they prepared to enter the trail system, they encountered a man and a woman who were leaving the preserve. The departing hikers warned them that they had spotted a black bear on the trails and strongly advised the group to turn around and choose a different location for their hike. The couple emphasized that the bear appeared agitated and recommended avoiding the area entirely. The American black bear is North America's most common bear species, with adults typically weighing between 200 and 600 pounds, though some males can exceed 800 pounds. Despite their name, black bears can range in color from black to brown, cinnamon, or even blonde. These powerful omnivores possess incredible strength, capable of running up to 30 miles per hour and climbing trees with remarkable agility. Their claws can grow up to 4 inches long and are designed for digging, climbing, and defense. New Jersey has one of the highest black bear densities in the nation, with approximately 3,000 bears residing throughout the state. Despite the clear warnings from the departing hikers, Steve and his friends decided to proceed with their planned hike. They entered the trail system and had been walking for approximately 30 minutes when they spotted a large black bear in a clearing ahead. The animal, later determined to weigh approximately 300 pounds, was standing beside a fallen log roughly 100 feet away from the group. Rather than immediately retreating, Stephen became excited about the rare opportunity to photograph a wild bear and began taking pictures with his smartphone. The bear initially appeared calm, occasionally looking in their direction but continuing to move around near the fallen tree. Stephen took 5 photographs of the animal from what he believed was a safe distance. However, after taking the photos, the group attempted to walk away from the area, but the bear began following them. As they continued along the trail, the bear's behavior became increasingly concerning. The animal closed the distance between itself and the hikers, approaching to within approximately 15 feet of the group. At this point, panic set in among the friends, and they made the critical decision to split up and run in different directions. The bear immediately pursued Stephen, who had begun climbing a rock formation in an attempt to escape. The bear reached him as he was partway up the rock face. The animal grabbed him with his powerful jaws, clamping down on his back and shoulder area, pulling him down from the rocks. The initial bite caused severe trauma to his upper torso, with the bear's teeth creating deep puncture wounds. The bear then dragged Stephen across the ground, maintaining its grip on his shoulder and back area. This action caused additional tissue damage and bleeding as the animal's teeth remained embedded in his flesh. The bear released its initial grip and attacked again, this time focusing on Stephen's neck. The animal's jaws clamped down with significant force, causing severe damage to blood vessels and soft tissue in the neck region. The bear used its claws to create lacerations across Stephen's chest and arms as it continued its attack. The savagery continued for several minutes, with the bear alternating between biting and clawing. The combination of bite wounds, claw marks, and the physical trauma from being dragged and pressed against the ground caused severe blood loss. The bear's final assault focused on Stephen's neck and head area, causing critical damage to vital structures. The severe trauma to his neck, combined with significant blood loss from multiple wounds, proved fatal. Stephen's body became motionless as the cumulative effects of the attack overwhelmed his ability to survive. The bear remained in the immediate area, exhibiting protective behavior over what it now considered its territory. When police and wildlife officials arrived at the scene after a 2-hour search, Stephen Logan was found dead with the bear still nearby. He had suffered severe trauma to his neck, back, chest, and arms, with significant blood loss from multiple bite and claw wounds. Officers shot and killed the bear at the scene. A necropsy later revealed that the animal had consumed human tissue. Stephen's tragic death marked a grim chapter in New Jersey's history, a reminder that black bears can turn deadly without warning. But over 2,000 miles away in the forests of Arizona, another encounter with the same species would prove just as brutal, this time unfolding not on a hiking trail, but in a woman's own backyard. It was October 25, 2017, just outside Flagstaff, Arizona. The remote wooded property stretched across several acres of pine and juniper forest, dotted with makeshift animal enclosures and rescue facilities. Marlene Brickshaw's self-proclaimed Little Ark was cluttered with bird feeders, rescue dog kennels, and a 40 by 60 foot chain link pen that housed 2 massive black bears. The property was located far from neighbors, surrounded by dense wilderness that provided natural camouflage for what had become an increasingly dangerous amateur wildlife operation. The bear enclosure was a simple chain-link fence with no roof, no backup barriers, and no safety protocols. Just a single gate that opened directly into the habitat. Marlene Brickshaw was a 58-year-old retired librarian who had spent the past 3 years operating an unlicensed wildlife rescue from her rural property. She was known throughout the county as the eccentric woman who collected stray animals and believed deeply that love and good intentions could overcome any danger. 3 years earlier, she had convinced authorities to let her take in 2 orphan black bear cubs after wildfires left them without their mother, claiming she had proper rehabilitation experience and facilities. Her neighbors knew her as someone who fed wild deer from her back porch and treated all animals as if they were domestic pets. The day had begun routinely for Marlene, with her usual rounds of feeding and caring for the animals on her property. She was running nearly 2 hours late for the bears' afternoon feeding, delayed by a lengthy phone call from her sister in California. The bears, Bruno and Baxter, had grown increasingly restless in their enclosure, pacing near the gate and showing signs of food-related agitation. Marlene loaded a tray with leftover lasagna rolls and fruit from her kitchen, then headed toward the pen carrying the food in both hands. She wore no protective gear, no gloves, and no safety equipment of any kind. Black bears may lack the size and aggression of their grizzly relatives, but they're opportunistic feeders with remarkable problem-solving skills. Their keen sense of smell can detect food from over a mile away, and once they associate humans with an easy meal, they may return repeatedly, becoming bolder and more unpredictable with each encounter. As Marlene approached the enclosure gate, Bruno, the larger of the 2 bears, weighing approximately 300 pounds, was already pacing near the entrance. His body language showed clear signs of agitation, tense movements, a fixated stare on the food, and flattened ears. Baxter, the smaller bear, remained in the far corner of the enclosure, showing submissive behavior toward his more dominant companion. As she entered the gate, she whistled her usual greeting to the animals. She had no way to defend herself and no backup plan if the situation turned dangerous. Bruno immediately focused on the food tray as Marlene stepped inside the enclosure. The bear moved directly toward her with purposeful strides, his attention completely fixed on the meal she was carrying. As she attempted to set the tray down in the usual feeding spot, Bruno approached aggressively, likely viewing her as competition for the food. The bear struck Marlene with significant force, knocking her backward onto the ground. The food tray fell from her hands, lasagna and fruit scattering across the dirt as she hit the earth. Bruno immediately positioned himself over her, preventing any attempt to escape toward the gate. The bear's jaws clamped down on Marlene's shoulder and neck area, his teeth creating deep puncture wounds in the soft tissue. The bite caused severe trauma to blood vessels and muscle in her upper torso and neck area. Bruno then began pulling her across the enclosure, maintaining his grip while dragging her away from the scattered food. This action caused additional tissue damage as his teeth remained embedded in her flesh, while the dragging motion created further lacerations. The bear released its initial hold and attacked again, this time focusing on her arms and torso. His claws created deep cuts across her chest and shoulders, penetrating through her clothing and into the underlying tissue. Each strike contributed to the blood loss and tissue damage. Blood loss from multiple wounds combined with the damage to her neck and respiratory system caused Marlene's strength to fade quickly. Her movements became increasingly weak as the bear maintained his aggressive behavior. The attack continued for several minutes, with Bruno alternating between biting and using his claws. The bear's behavior suggested food-related aggression rather than predatory hunting, but the result was equally devastating. Marlene's body eventually became still as the cumulative effects of blood loss and trauma proved fatal. The bear remained in the enclosure, continuing to exhibit territorial behavior around the body. 2 hours later, deputies found Marlene dead from massive injuries. Bruno was euthanized on site following standard protocol, while Baxter was tranquilized and transferred to a legitimate wildlife sanctuary in Colorado. The investigation revealed numerous safety violations in her amateur wildlife operation, with Arizona Game and Fish Department officials emphasizing the extreme dangers of keeping wild animals without proper training, facilities, or safety protocols. Marlene's death stood as a grim warning about the dangers of keeping wild predators in captivity without proper safeguards, a mistake that cost both her life and Bruno's. It was October 12, 2016, and the rugged landscape of Rocky Mountain National Park stretched across the Colorado wilderness in all its autumn glory. Golden aspen leaves danced in the crisp mountain air while towering peaks cast long shadows across alpine meadows dotted with granite boulders. The popular Bear Lake Trail was busy with tourists enjoying the perfect fall weather, but one couple had ventured off the main path to explore a quieter section of the park where wildlife sightings were more common. Brad Mitchell, a 34-year-old accountant from Denver, had convinced his girlfriend Sarah to join him on this weekend hiking adventure despite her preference for city activities. Brad worked long hours at a downtown accounting firm, spending most of his days hunched over spreadsheets and tax documents. But he had recently developed an obsession with outdoor photography and wildlife encounters. His suburban upbringing had given him extensive experience with domestic animals, particularly cats, and his family had owned several throughout his childhood. Brad's relationship with animals had always been remarkably naive. He genuinely believed that his calm demeanor and gentle approach made him naturally gifted at connecting with any creature he encountered. His apartment housed 2 rescue cats that adored him, and he had successfully befriended numerous neighborhood strays over the years. This success with domestic felines had given Brad an inflated confidence in his ability to interact safely with all members of the cat family. Sarah had grown increasingly concerned about Brad's tendency to approach wild animals during their hiking trips. On previous outings, he had attempted to feed chipmunks by hand, approached elk at dangerously close distances, and once spent 20 minutes trying to coax a fox to come closer for photos. Each successful interaction reinforced Brad's belief that he possessed some special connection with wildlife that kept him safe from harm. That afternoon, the couple had been hiking for nearly 3 hours when they decided to rest on a scenic overlook that provided panoramic views of the surrounding peaks. Sarah was organizing their backpack when Brad suddenly grabbed her arm and pointed excitedly toward a rocky ledge approximately 50 yards away. Resting in the afternoon sun was a magnificent mountain cougar, its tawny coat blending perfectly with the granite surroundings. Mountain cougars, also known as pumas or mountain lions, are North America's second largest cat species, with adult males weighing between 115 and 220 pounds. These powerful predators are perfectly adapted for hunting in mountainous terrain, possessing incredible strength, speed, and agility that allows them to take down prey much larger than themselves. Cougars are solitary, territorial animals with razor-sharp retractable claws and powerful jaws capable of delivering a crushing bite to the neck or skull of their victims. While generally elusive and avoiding human contact, cougars become extremely aggressive when cornered or approached directly, often attacking before humans realize they've crossed into the danger zone. Sarah immediately recognized the danger and began backing away slowly while urging Brad to do the same. However, Brad was mesmerized by the beautiful animal and saw an unprecedented opportunity to interact with a wild cat using the same techniques that had worked so successfully with domestic felines. He had read online that cougars were generally shy and avoided human contact, which he interpreted as evidence that they were essentially large, timid house cats. Brad began approaching the cougar slowly, extending his hand in the same manner he used to greet unfamiliar domestic cats. He made soft kissing sounds and spoke in the gentle cooing voice that had never failed to attract neighborhood strays. Sarah's urgent whispers for him to stop were ignored as Brad became completely focused on what he believed would be an amazing wildlife encounter. The cougar's head lifted immediately as Brad approached, its amber eyes tracking his movement with predatory intensity. The big cat's ears swiveled forward and its muscles tensed as it assessed this unusual human behavior. Brad misinterpreted the cougar's alert posture as curiosity, rather than the warning signs of a predator preparing to defend itself. As Brad closed the distance to approximately 10 feet, the cougar's body language shifted dramatically. Its tail began twitching with agitation, and it crouched lower against the rocky ledge. These were clear warning signs that Brad's untrained eye failed to recognize as the predator prepared to eliminate what it perceived as a direct threat. The 180-pound cougar launched itself from the rocky ledge with explosive power when Brad reached within striking distance. Its muscular frame collided with Brad's chest and drove him backward onto the rocky ground. The impact knocked the wind from Brad's lungs as the cougar's powerful jaws found purchase on his torso, its razor-sharp talons raking through his hiking clothes and into the flesh beneath. The cougar's massive jaws clamped down on Brad's throat with crushing force, its powerful canine teeth puncturing through skin and muscle to reach vital arteries. The big cat's bite force, exceeding 400 pounds per square inch, compressed Brad's windpipe and severed major blood vessels in his neck. Brad's hands instinctively reached up to push the cougar away, but his strength was no match for the powerful predator. The cougar's hind legs kicked violently against Brad's abdomen and chest, its claws opening deep gashes that immediately began bleeding profusely. Each powerful thrust of the cat's rear legs drove its claws deeper into Brad's torso, puncturing organs and causing massive internal trauma. The cougar's front paws maintained their grip on Brad's shoulders, holding him in position while its jaws worked to crush his throat. Within minutes, Brad's struggles grew weaker as massive blood loss and trauma overwhelmed his system. The cougar maintained its death grip until Brad's movement ceased completely, its predatory instincts ensuring the threat was eliminated. Sarah's screams echoed across the mountainside as she witnessed the brutal attack from her position 30 yards away. Park rangers and emergency responders arrived 20 minutes later, but Brad was already dead. The investigation revealed that Brad had violated every basic safety protocol for wildlife encounters in cougar habitat. The massive cat was tracked by wildlife officials and euthanized the following day, as park policy requires the destruction of any cougar that kills a human. Brad's death became a cautionary tale about the dangers of anthropomorphizing wild animals, but his fatal misunderstanding wasn't unique among those who underestimated nature's deadliest predators. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in Florida, another overconfident individual was about to discover that athletic ability means nothing when you ignore the ocean's most efficient killers. It was July 4th, 2015, and New Smyrna Beach stretched along Florida's Atlantic coast under the brilliant summer sunshine, its white sands packed with thousands of people celebrating Independence Day. The warm ocean breeze carried the sounds of laughter, music, and crashing waves, while families set up colorful umbrellas and beach chairs for the holiday festivals. Red warning flags snapped in the wind along the shoreline, posted by lifeguards who had received reports of aggressive shark activity in the area following recent storms. Ashley Thompson, a 28-year-old competitive swimmer from Orlando, had driven to New Smyrna Beach specifically for her daily ocean training session. Despite the holiday crowds and posted warnings, Ashley maintained a rigorous swimming schedule that included regular ocean workouts, and she had built a modest Instagram following of 2,400 followers by documenting her fearless approach to open water swimming in challenging conditions. Ashley's background as a former college swimmer had given her tremendous confidence in aquatic environments. She had competed at the Division II level for 4 years, specializing in distance events that required exceptional endurance and mental toughness. After graduation, Ashley had transitioned to open water swimming, participating in several marathon swim events and building a reputation for tackling conditions that intimidated other swimmers. The 28-year-old had developed a dismissive attitude toward shark warnings, viewing them as media sensationalism designed to frighten tourists rather than legitimate safety concerns. Her extensive research into shark attack statistics had convinced her that the odds of an encounter were astronomically low, and she believed her swimming skills and ocean experience made her essentially immune to marine predator threats. That morning, Ashley had arrived at the beach to find lifeguards actively discouraging swimmers from entering the water due to recent shark sightings and murky conditions caused by the previous night's thunderstorms. Multiple beachgoers approached Ashley as she prepared her swimming gear, warning her about the red flags and sharing reports of a large bull shark that had been spotted hunting in the surf zone. Bull sharks are among the ocean's most dangerous predators, capable of thriving in both saltwater and freshwater environments. Adult bulls can reach lengths of 11 feet and weights exceeding 500 pounds, with powerful jaws filled with triangular serrated teeth designed for tearing flesh. These aggressive hunters are responsible for more unprovoked attacks on humans than any other shark species except great whites. Bull sharks are particularly dangerous in shallow, murky water, where their excellent senses give them significant advantages over human swimmers. Ashley dismissed the warnings with characteristic confidence, explaining to concerned beachgoers that sharks were more afraid of humans than humans should be of sharks. Despite the lifeguard's direct request for her to stay out of the water, Ashley entered the surf and began swimming toward the deeper water beyond the breakers. The bull shark had been hunting in the area for several hours, taking advantage of the reduced visibility caused by sediment stirred up by the previous night's storms. The massive predator, measuring nearly 10 feet in length and weighing over 400 pounds, had already made several unsuccessful hunting attempts in the murky conditions. Ashley had been swimming for approximately 15 minutes when she encountered the bull shark in water roughly 12 feet deep. The predator approached from below and behind, using the murky water as perfect camouflage for its attack. The bull shark's assault came without warning. The massive predator struck Ashley from below with explosive force, its powerful jaws clamping down on her left leg just above the knee. The shark's serrated teeth sliced through muscle and bone with devastating efficiency, while its crushing bite force shattered Ashley's femur instantly. The bull shark's natural hunting behavior involved powerful head shaking to disorient prey and cause maximum tissue damage. Ashley's leg was nearly severed by the shark's razor-sharp teeth as the predator shook her violently in the churning water. Following typical bull shark behavior, the predator released its grip after the initial devastating bite, but the damage was already catastrophic. Ashley's panic thrashing in the water only accelerated the massive blood loss from her severed arteries. The shark's initial attack had opened major blood vessels in her thigh, and her frantic movements pumped blood into the surrounding water at an alarming rate. The combination of severe trauma, shock, and rapid blood loss quickly overwhelmed her system. Blood poured from Ashley's catastrophic injuries, creating a crimson cloud in the water that further excited the bull shark's predatory instincts. Within minutes, Ashley's movements ceased as massive blood loss and shock proved fatal. Her body disappeared beneath the surface as the shark continued to investigate the area. Beachgoers who had been watching from the shore immediately called 911 when they saw the water turning red with blood. Coast Guard divers recovered Ashley's remains later that day. The investigation concluded that Ashley had ignored multiple safety warnings and entered the water despite official advisories against swimming. New Smyrna Beach remained closed to swimmers for a full week following the incident. Yet, even experienced wildlife enthusiasts weren't immune to fatal encounters, particularly when overconfidence led them to underestimate the dangers posed by seemingly familiar animals. Deep in the Tennessee mountains, a photographer was about to learn that positioning yourself between a mother bear and her cubs is never a good idea. It was June 8, 2017, and the ancient mountains of Great Smoky Mountains National Park rose majestically above the Tennessee landscape, their peaks shrouded in the characteristic mist that gave the range its name. The late spring afternoon was perfect for wildlife photography, with golden sunlight filtering through the dense canopy of oak, maple, and hickory trees. Cataract Falls Trail wound through pristine wilderness where black bears were commonly spotted during the warmer months. Derek Johnson, a 31-year-old amateur photographer from Nashville, had driven 3 hours to reach this remote section of the park, carrying professional camera equipment worth over $5,000. Derek worked as a graphic designer during the week but spent his weekends pursuing his passion for wildlife photography, building a modest Instagram following of 1,800 followers who appreciated his dedication to capturing authentic animal behavior. Derek's interest in bear photography had developed over the past 2 years, during which he had successfully photographed dozens of black bears throughout the southeastern United States. His online research had convinced him that black bears were generally docile creatures that posed minimal threat to humans who maintained respectful distances. Derek had been particularly excited about this trip because other photographers had reported a female black bear with 2 cubs frequenting the area. What Derek had failed to understand was that female bears with cubs are exponentially more dangerous than solitary bears, as their maternal instincts drive them to eliminate any perceived threat to their offspring with extreme aggression. His misinterpretation of online information had led him to seek out exactly the type of encounter that experienced wildlife photographers avoid at all costs. Black bears are North America's most common bear species, with adult females typically weighing between 200 and 300 pounds. Despite their smaller size compared to grizzlies, black bears possess incredible strength and can run up to 30 miles per hour through dense forest terrain. Female bears with cubs become extremely territorial and aggressive, viewing any human presence as a potential threat to their offspring. Mother bears will attack without warning to defend their young, using their powerful claws and crushing bite force to eliminate perceived dangers. Derek had been hiking for nearly 2 hours when he spotted the bear family in a small meadow approximately 100 yards from the main trail. The mother bear was foraging for berries while her 2 cubs played nearby, creating exactly the type of scene Derek had hoped to photograph. Instead of maintaining a safe distance and using his telephoto lens, Derek decided to position himself for closer shots. Derek's fatal mistake was his decision to circle around the meadow and position himself between the bear family and the forest edge, where they would naturally retreat if threatened. He believed his tactical positioning would keep the bears in the open meadow longer, allowing him to capture more dramatic photographs. The mother bear detected Derek's presence immediately, her exceptional sense of smell identifying the human scent long before she could see him. Her protective instincts activated instantly as she assessed the potential threat to her cubs, who were playing approximately 20 yards from Derek's chosen position. The mother bear's charge covered the distance between them in less than 5 seconds, giving Derek no time to retreat or seek shelter. The 250-pound female struck Derek's back with bone-crushing force, sending him sprawling face-first into the rocky ground while his expensive camera equipment scattered across the meadow. The bear's powerful claws raked across Derek's back and shoulders, opening deep gashes that immediately began bleeding profusely. The mother bear's protective fury drove her to continue the assault with methodical brutality, her jaws clamping down on Derek's neck with crushing force. Her bite pressure fractured vertebrae and severed major arteries. The mother bear's assault continued for several minutes, her protective rage ensuring that Derek posed no further danger to her offspring. Derek's struggles grew weaker as massive trauma and blood loss overwhelmed his system, his movement ceasing as the bear's brutal attack proved fatal. Other hikers discovered Derek's remains hours later and called park authorities. The mother bear and her cubs were tracked but left undisturbed, as wildlife officials determined she had been acting within normal protective behavioral patterns when defending her young. But even the most experienced animal handlers sometimes make fatal errors in judgment, particularly when overconfidence led them to ignore basic safety protocols. In Texas, a veterinary assistant's belief in her special bond with animals would prove tragically misguided. It was March 15, 2018, in the sprawling grounds of a private exotic animal sanctuary outside Austin, Texas, buzzed with the weekend activities of volunteers and staff members caring for rescued wildlife. The facility housed over 200 animals, including big cats, primates, and various species that had been confiscated from illegal owners or retired from entertainment industries. Michelle Davis, the 29-year-old veterinary assistant, had been volunteering at the sanctuary every weekend for over 2 years, building relationships with the animals and documenting her experiences for her 2,200 Instagram followers. Michelle's professional background with domestic animals had given her confidence around wildlife, but she had developed a dangerous tendency to anthropomorphize the sanctuary's residents. The 29-year-old had developed what she believed was a special bond with Caesar, a 150-pound adult male chimpanzee who had been retired from a research facility. Michelle often spent extra time near Caesar's enclosure, convinced that their connection transcended the normal barriers between humans and wild animals. Adult male chimpanzees are among the most dangerous animals in captivity, possessing the strength of 5 grown men combined with unpredictable temperaments that can shift from calm to violent without warning. Caesar weighed 150 pounds of pure muscle, with long arms capable of incredible reach and hands that could grip with crushing force. Chimpanzees have powerful jaws filled with sharp teeth, and they instinctively target the face, hands, and genitals during attacks. That afternoon, Michelle had noticed that Caesar's favorite toy had been left inside his enclosure after the morning cleaning routine. Sanctuary protocols required 2-person teams and protective equipment for any entry into primate enclosures. But Michelle decided to retrieve the toy quickly while other volunteers were busy elsewhere. Michelle's fatal mistake was her belief that her relationship with Caesar made safety protocols unnecessary. She had observed him playing with the toy countless times and wanted to capture a close-up photo of their interaction for her social media content. Caesar appeared calm and friendly as Michelle entered his enclosure, approaching her with what seemed like playful curiosity. Michelle bent down to retrieve the toy, turning her back on the massive chimpanzee while focusing on her camera settings. Caesar's demeanor changed instantly, from apparent friendliness to explosive aggression. The chimpanzee's attack was swift and devastating. Caesar's powerful arms wrapped around Michelle's torso from behind, his crushing grip preventing any possibility of escape. His long fingers found purchase on Michelle's face and head, his incredible strength allowing him to control her movements completely. Caesar's teeth tore into Michelle's scalp and face with terrifying efficiency, ripping away chunks of flesh while his powerful hands simultaneously attacked her arms and hands. The chimpanzee's natural aggressive behaviors targeted multiple areas simultaneously, his teeth and hands working with methodical brutality to inflict maximum damage in minimal time. Michelle's screams alerted other volunteers, but the attack was over within seconds. Caesar's territorial instincts had been triggered, and his explosive assault had already caused catastrophic injuries. The massive chimpanzee stepped back from Michelle's motionless form, his aggressive behavior gradually subsiding as quickly as it had erupted. Staff members arrived with tranquilizer equipment, but Caesar had already returned to a calmer state. Michelle's injuries were catastrophic, and she died from massive trauma before paramedics could transport her to the hospital. The investigation revealed multiple safety protocol violations that had contributed to the tragedy. Caesar was relocated to a more secure facility with enhanced containment systems, and his aggressive behavior made him unsuitable for the sanctuary's educational programs. Michelle's death prompted comprehensive reviews of safety protocols at exotic animal facilities nationwide, and enhanced training programs for volunteers working with dangerous species. However, the most shocking example of human foolishness around dangerous animals occurred in Florida, where one man's complete disregard for nature's most efficient predators would cost him everything in front of his horrified girlfriend. It was August 22, 2014, and the vast wetlands of Everglades National Park stretched endlessly across the southern Florida landscape under the blazing summer sun. Ancient cypress trees draped with Spanish moss created a cathedral-like canopy over dark water channels, while the humid air buzzed with insects and echoed with the calls of countless bird species. The remote canal system near Flamingo was largely deserted except for occasional park rangers and the abundant wildlife that called this pristine wilderness home. Ryan Martinez, a 25-year-old personal trainer from Miami, had driven 2 hours to reach this secluded section of the park with his girlfriend Maria, seeking the perfect location for his latest social media challenge. Ryan had built the following of 3,600 Instagram followers by documenting increasingly extreme fitness challenges, and he had recently begun incorporating natural environments into his content to differentiate himself from gym-based fitness influencers. Ryan's athletic background had given him tremendous confidence in his physical abilities. He had been a competitive swimmer in high school and maintained exceptional cardiovascular fitness through his personal training career. His social media content focused on pushing physical limits in unusual locations, and he took pride in attempting challenges that other fitness influencers considered too dangerous or extreme. The 25-year-old had been planning this Everglades adventure for weeks, researching remote locations where he could film unique content without crowds of tourists. His latest idea involved what he called wild swimming challenges in natural bodies of water, believing his athletic training made him capable of handling any aquatic environment he might encounter. That afternoon, Ryan had identified a canal that appeared perfect for his purposes. Deep enough for swimming but narrow enough to provide dramatic visuals for his camera. Despite clear warning signs posted throughout the area about alligator presence, Ryan dismissed the dangers as exaggerated, convinced that his speed and agility in the water would keep him safe from any lazy reptiles that might be present. American alligators are apex predators that have remained virtually unchanged for over 200 million years, perfectly adapted for their role as ambush hunters in aquatic environments. Adult males can reach lengths of 14 feet and weights exceeding 1,000 pounds, with jaw muscles capable of exerting over 3,000 pounds of pressure per square inch. Alligators are deceptively fast both in water and on land, capable of explosive bursts of speed that can reach 30 miles per hour on land and up to 20 miles per hour in water over short distances. They're opportunistic predators that view any movement in their territory as either prey to be consumed or threats to be eliminated. Maria had been growing increasingly concerned about Ryan's escalating stunts, but her protests were dismissed as he prepared his camera equipment and explained his plan to jump into the canal for a swimming challenge. Ryan boasted that he could easily outswim any alligator if one happened to show up, comparing the reptiles to logs floating in the water. The massive alligator had been resting motionlessly in the murky water for over an hour, its 12-foot frame perfectly camouflaged among the cypress roots and fallen branches. The ancient predator's presence was completely undetectable to Ryan's untrained eyes, as he positioned himself at the canal's edge and activated his camera's recording function. Ryan's jump into the water triggered the alligator's predatory instincts instantly. The moment Ryan's body hit the surface, the massive reptile exploded into motion with devastating speed. The alligator's powerful tail propelled it through the water like a missile, covering the distance to Ryan in less than 2 seconds. The alligator's massive jaws clamped down on Ryan's torso with bone-crushing force, its 3,000 pounds of bite pressure instantly fracturing ribs and puncturing vital organs. Ryan's athletic training was useless against a predator that had perfected its hunting technique over millions of years of evolution. The alligator immediately began its signature death roll, spinning rapidly in the water while maintaining its crushing grip on Ryan's body. The violent rotation dislocated Ryan's limbs and caused massive internal trauma while simultaneously disorienting him and filling his lungs with water. After several intense rotations, the alligator dragged Ryan beneath the surface to complete the drowning process. Maria's screams echoed across the wetlands as she watched the massive alligator drag Ryan beneath the surface. The death roll had lasted only seconds, but the damage was already catastrophic. Ryan's struggles grew weaker as the combination of crushing bite force, drowning, and massive blood loss overwhelmed his system while the alligator held him submerged. Within minutes, Ryan's movement ceased as the alligator's brutal attack proved fatal. The massive reptile remained motionless in the deeper section of the canal, guarding its kill beneath the dark water. Park rangers arrived within 30 minutes of Maria's 911 call, but the alligator remained aggressive and protective of its territory. Wildlife officials eventually captured the massive reptile and relocated it to a more remote area of the park, as it had been acting within normal predatory behavior patterns. Ryan's death prompted enhanced warning systems throughout the park and stricter enforcement of safety regulations regarding water activities. His family filed lawsuits against social media platforms, arguing that the pursuit of viral content had contributed to increasingly dangerous behavior among young influencers. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.